The bullies thought trapping the quiet girl in the gymnasium would be their biggest victory. Big mistake. What happened next revealed skills that could have killed them all. Riley Martinez sat in the corner of her chemistry class at Westfield Academy, methodically copying notes while trying to remain invisible. At 17, she had perfected the art of blending into the background, her long black hair creating a curtain between herself and the world. She wore the same faded military surplus jacket every day, 3 sizes too big, hiding her small frame beneath its worn fabric. The jacket had belonged to her father before his final deployment to Afghanistan, and wearing it felt like carrying a piece of him with her. Moving to Westfield 6 months ago had been necessary but painful. After her father's death and her mother's subsequent breakdown, Riley had been sent to live with her grandmother in this affluent suburban town where military families were rare and her quiet demeanor was mistaken for weakness. Her grandmother, Riley Martinez, was a retired army nurse who understood Riley's need for space and time to process her grief. But the other students at Westfield Academy saw only an easy target. The bell rang, signaling the end of 3rd period, and Riley carefully packed her notebook into her worn backpack. She moved deliberately, watching the classroom empty before standing to leave. This calculated timing usually helped her avoid the hallway crowds where trouble often found her, but today she wasn't quick enough. "Look what we have here," came the familiar voice of Madison Pierce, the 17-year-old queen bee of Westfield Academy, whose father owned half the commercial real estate in town. Madison stood in the doorway with her usual entourage, blocking Riley's exit with practiced ease. Behind her lurked Jessica Chen, whose family's tech fortune had bought her way into every social circle, and Amber Walsh, a soccer star whose athletic build and aggressive personality made her the perfect enforcer for Madison's schemes. Riley kept her eyes down, trying to step around them, but Jessica moved to block her path. "Where are you going so fast, army brat?" Jessica's voice carried the casual cruelty that came from never facing real consequences for her actions. The nickname had stuck since Riley's first day, when a teacher had mentioned her military family background during introductions. "Just trying to get to my next class," Riley said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. She had learned that engaging too much only encouraged them, but complete silence seemed to anger them even more. It was a delicate balance she had never quite mastered. Madison stepped closer, and Riley caught the scent of expensive perfume, mixed with the underlying meanness that seemed to radiate from the girl. "You know, I was thinking about your situation, Riley. It must be so hard being all alone here, no daddy to protect you anymore." The words hit like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage. Riley's hands clenched into fists inside her jacket pockets, but she forced herself to remain still. Violence solved nothing, her grandmother had taught her. Violence only created more problems, more attention, more complications they couldn't afford. Riley was already on thin ice academically, having missed so much school during her father's final months and her mother's hospitalization. One fight, one incident, and she could lose her chance at graduating with her class. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue?" Amber pushed, her athletic frame towering over Riley's smaller stature. The 3 girls had positioned themselves in a triangle around Riley, cutting off all escape routes with the precision of predators who had done this many times before. Other students walked past in the hallway, some glancing over but none stopping to help. Riley had learned not to expect intervention from her classmates, who were either afraid of Madison's social power or simply didn't care enough to get involved. The pattern had started small during Riley's 2nd week at Westfield Academy. Madison Pierce ruled the junior class with an iron fist wrapped in designer clothing and fake smiles. Her father's real estate empire had built half the shopping centers in town, and Madison wielded that influence like a weapon. She had identified Riley as an outsider from day one, sensing vulnerability the way sharks sense blood in the water. Jessica Chen served as Madison's strategic mastermind, her family's tech wealth giving her access to the latest gadgets and social media platforms that she used to orchestrate psychological warfare. She was the one who created fake accounts to spread rumors, who screenshotted private conversations and shared them publicly, who understood exactly how to weaponize the digital landscape against her targets. Her cruelty was calculated and precise, designed to inflict maximum emotional damage while maintaining plausible deniability. Amber Walsh completed the trio as the physical enforcer. Her success on the varsity soccer team had earned her a scholarship to State University, and she channeled her competitive aggression into bullying with the same intensity she brought to sports. She was the one who accidentally shoulder-checked targets in the hallway, who slammed locker doors on fingers, who made sure the physical intimidation backed up the psychological attacks. Together, they had perfected a system that allowed them to torment their victims while avoiding serious consequences. Madison's father donated generously to the school. Jessica's academic achievements impressed the teachers, and Amber's athletic success brought prestige to Westfield Academy. The administration turned a blind eye to their behavior, unwilling to risk the complications that would come from seriously disciplining 3 of their most prominent students. Riley represented everything they despised. She was different, vulnerable, and worst of all, she refused to fight back in ways that would give them excuse to escalate. Her military background should have made her strong, but instead she seemed broken by loss and grief. She wore the same old jacket every day, carried her books in a worn backpack that had seen better years, and ate lunch alone in the library rather than the cafeteria where social hierarchies were reinforced daily. The bullying escalated systematically. First came the verbal taunts in passing, casual cruelties delivered with practiced innocence whenever adults were nearby. Then social media harassment began, with fake accounts posting embarrassing photos taken without Riley's knowledge and spreading rumors about her family's financial situation and her mother's mental health struggles. Physical intimidation followed. Naturally, books knocked from Riley's hands in crowded hallways, drinks accidentally spilled on her homework, deliberate collisions that sent her sprawling while the perpetrators apologized with exaggerated concern. Each incident was carefully calculated to seem accidental to observers, while sending a clear message to Riley about her place in the school's social ecosystem. The 3 girls had studied Riley's schedule meticulously, learning her patterns and identifying opportunities for maximum impact. They knew she avoided the cafeteria, preferring to eat alone in quiet spaces. They knew she stayed late in the library to avoid the afternoon bus crowds. They knew she took the long route between classes to avoid heavily trafficked hallways where confrontations were more likely. Most importantly, they had learned that Riley never fought back, never reported them, never seemed to have anyone who would advocate for her. She was the perfect victim, isolated and vulnerable, someone they could torment without fear of meaningful retaliation or consequences. The incidents began small, but grew bolder with each passing week. During Riley's 3rd month at Westfield Academy, Madison discovered that Riley's father had died in combat, a piece of information she weaponized with surgical precision. "At least my dad comes home every night," became Madison's favorite taunt, delivered with a sweet smile whenever teachers were within earshot. Riley's response was always the same: silence, downcast eyes, and a tightening of her jaw that spoke to tremendous self-control. She would adjust her father's jacket around her shoulders like armor and continue walking, never giving them the satisfaction of tears or anger they seemed to crave. This restraint only frustrated her tormentors more, driving them to increasingly creative cruelties. Jessica began photographing Riley during vulnerable moments, eating alone, stumbling when pushed, looking lost in crowded hallways. These images appeared on anonymous social media accounts, with cruel captions about charity cases and military rejects. The posts gained traction among Westfield students, turning Riley's pain into entertainment for their peers. During fourth period lunch, Amber would position herself near Riley's usual quiet spots, making loud comments about welfare kids and damaged goods from broken families. When Riley tried to find new places to eat, she discovered that Madison's influence extended everywhere. Students who might have been friendly suddenly avoided her, unwilling to risk their own social standing by associating with Madison's chosen target. The physical escalation came gradually. Books knocked from Riley's. Hands became deliberate shoves. Accidental collisions became calculated body checks that sent her stumbling into lockers. Each incident occurred in blind spots or crowded areas where witnesses couldn't be certain what they had seen, and Riley's continued silence protected her attackers from consequences. Riley's grandmother noticed the changes at home. Riley Martinez had survived her own share of military hardships, and she recognized the signs of someone under sustained attack. But when she asked direct questions, Riley deflected with practiced ease. "It's fine, abuela. Just adjusting to a new school." She couldn't bear the thought of her grandmother already caring for her after losing her son and dealing with her daughter-in-law's breakdown, taking on another burden. The truth was that Riley understood violence intimately. Her father had taught her to fight before she could properly ride a bicycle. Staff Sergeant Marcus Martinez had been a combat instructor before his deployment, specializing in close-quarters combat and hand-to-hand techniques. During his leave time, he had trained Riley in the basement of their old house, teaching her discipline. Alongside devastating techniques, "Violence is a tool, Mija," he had told her during one of their last training sessions before his final deployment. "But it's the last tool you reach for, not the first. A warrior's greatest strength is knowing when not to fight." Those words echoed in Riley's mind every time Madison's crew cornered her, every time Amber's shoulder drove into her ribs, every time Jessica's camera captured her humiliation. Riley had promised her dying father that she would be better than the violence that had taken him. She would find another way to handle conflict, another path through the darkness that seemed to follow military families. Even as the bruises accumulated and the psychological warfare intensified, she held on to that promise like a lifeline. But promises, she was beginning to learn, sometimes became impossible to keep. The breaking point came on a grey Tuesday afternoon, in early November, when the autumn air carried the promise of winter's harshness. Riley had been at Westfield Academy for 5 months, and the daily torment had become as routine as breathing. She had developed strategies for survival, memorizing schedules to avoid confrontations, eating lunch in the nurse's office when possible, and timing her movements to minimize exposure to Madison's hunting grounds. That particular day, Riley had successfully navigated through most of her classes without incident. She was gathering her books from her locker when she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. Jessica was talking to Madison near the water fountain, their voices carrying in the empty hallway. "My dad's law firm is handling the Martinez case," Jessica was saying, her tone casual, but her words devastating. "Apparently the military widow is trying to sue for better benefits, but she's completely unstable. Multiple psychiatric holds, unable to care for her own daughter. The grandmother's barely keeping it together financially." Riley's hands froze on her textbooks. Her mother's private struggles, her grandmother's quiet sacrifices, her family's most painful secrets were being discussed like gossip. The legal case Jessica mentioned was real. Her grandmother had been fighting for months to get proper survivor benefits and mental health coverage for Riley's mother. "That explains why the army brat is so pathetic," Madison replied, with genuine satisfaction. Crazy runs in the family. No wonder she's so weird and broken. The words hit Riley like physical blows. She had endured months of personal attacks, accepted the daily humiliations, and swallowed every cruel comment about her father's death. But hearing her mother's illness and her grandmother's struggles weaponized as entertainment crossed a line she hadn't known existed. Riley closed her locker with deliberate care, her hands steady despite the rage building in her chest. She turned to face the two girls, and something in her expression made them step back instinctively. For the first time in months, Riley looked directly at her tormentors without flinching or looking away. "What did you just say?" Riley's voice was quiet, but carried a new quality that neither Madison nor Jessica had heard before. It was the voice of someone who had reached their absolute limit, who had nothing left to lose. Madison recovered quickly, her natural arrogance reasserting itself. "Oh, did we hurt your feelings? Truth stings, doesn't it? Your whole family is a disaster, and everyone knows it." "My mother is sick," Riley said, her voice remaining steady despite the emotion churning beneath the surface. "She's sick because she watched her husband die slowly from injuries sustained serving this country. She's sick because she held my father's hand while he died in agony. And she's sick because she had to explain to her 17-year-old daughter why her hero was never coming home." Jessica smirked, sensing an opportunity to inflict maximum damage. "Sounds like she's just weak, like mother, like daughter, I guess." The silence that followed was deafening. Riley stood perfectly still, her father's jacket hanging loose around her shoulders, her dark eyes fixed on Jessica's face with an intensity that made the other girls smile, falter. Students passing in the hallway sensed the tension and began to gather, forming a loose circle around the confrontation. "You don't know anything about strength," Riley said finally, her words carrying a weight that seemed to press against everyone present. The confrontation in the hallway had drawn attention that Madison couldn't tolerate. By the next morning, word had spread through Westfield Academy's social networks that the quiet army brat had finally shown some backbone. Madison saw this as a direct challenge to her authority, a crack in the foundation of fear and respect she had built over 3 years of careful social engineering. "She thinks she can embarrass me in front of everyone," Madison told her inner circle during their morning meeting in the senior parking lot. Time to remind her exactly who runs this school. The plan they devised was more elaborate than their previous schemes. Jessica had discovered that Riley stayed after school on Thursdays for mandatory tutoring in the math lab, a requirement for students struggling academically. The building was mostly empty by 4:30, with only a few teachers remaining in their classrooms and the custodial staff beginning their evening routines. Thursday afternoon arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of weather that made students restless and eager to leave campus. Riley finished her tutoring session and packed her materials slowly, dreading the walk home where she would have to face her grandmother's concerned questions about the fresh bruises on her arms. Riley Martinez missed nothing, and Riley was running out of explanations for her injuries. As Riley left the math lab, she noticed the hallways were unusually quiet. Most students had departed for their after-school activities or part-time jobs, leaving behind only the echo of her footsteps on polished linoleum. She quickened her pace, instinctively sensing that something was wrong. Madison stepped out from behind the trophy case near the main entrance, blocking Riley's path to the exit. "Going somewhere, army brat?" Riley's heart rate spiked, but she kept walking. "I just want to go home." "Oh, but we have unfinished business." Jessica appeared from the opposite direction, her phone already recording. "Yesterday's little outburst was very entertaining. We thought you might like to give us an encore performance." Amber emerged from the gymnasium entrance, completing the triangle that had become their signature formation. "The gym's empty," she announced with satisfaction. "Coach Henderson left an hour ago, and the cleaning crew won't be here until 6. Riley calculated distances and escape routes with the tactical awareness her father had drilled into her during countless training sessions. The main doors were blocked by Madison, the side exits were too far away, and running would only trigger their pursuit instincts. She was trapped, and they knew it. "What do you want?" Riley asked, backing slowly toward the gymnasium doors. "We want you to understand your place," Madison said, advancing with predatory confidence. "Yesterday, you forgot that you're nothing here. You're a charity case, a damaged little girl whose daddy died playing soldier and whose mommy went crazy." From the grief, Riley's jaw tightened, but she continued backing away. The gymnasium doors were directly behind her now, and she could feel the metal handles pressing against her shoulder blades. "Cat got your tongue again," Amber taunted, pushing Riley backward through the doors into the darkened gymnasium. The heavy doors swung shut behind them with a sound like a coffin closing, and Riley heard the distinctive click of Jessica engaging the door lock from the inside. The gymnasium was dimly lit by emergency lighting, casting long shadows across the polished floor. The smell of sweat and rubber filled the air, mixing with the metallic tang of fear that Riley could taste on her tongue. Madison, Jessica, and Amber spread out in a loose formation, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space as they stalked their prey. "Perfect," Madison said, her voice carrying clearly in the empty gym. "No witnesses, no teachers, no cameras, just us girls having a heart-to-heart conversation." Riley backed toward the center of the gym, her mind racing through possibilities. The locked doors eliminated escape, and the three girls had positioned themselves to cut off any retreat to the equipment rooms or storage areas. She was completely isolated, exactly where they wanted her. "You know what I think?" Jessica said, still recording with her phone. "I think it's time our little army brat learned some respect. This is going viral, by the way. Everyone's going to see what happens when someone tries to stand up to us." Amber cracked her knuckles, the sound sharp and threatening in the enclosed space. "I've been waiting for this. 5 months of watching you mope around like some tragic victim. Time to give you something real to cry about." Riley felt the familiar weight of her father's jacket on her shoulders, the fabric worn soft from years of wear. Inside the left pocket, her fingers found the small metal object she had carried every day since his funeral. His dog tags, the ones the army had returned with his personal effects. She gripped them tightly, drawing strength from the connection to the man who had taught her everything about fighting and everything about restraint. "My father served 3 tours in Afghanistan," Riley said quietly, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "He earned 2 Bronze Stars and a Purple Heart. He died protecting people who couldn't protect themselves." Madison aft, a sound devoid of warmth or humanity. "And now his little girl is about to get the beating of her life. I bet he'd be so proud." Something shifted in Riley's posture, subtle but unmistakable. The hunched shoulders straightened, the downcast eyes lifted, and the tremor of fear in her hands disappeared completely. For 5 months, she had been playing a role. The broken victim, the grieving daughter, the easy target, but beneath that carefully constructed facade lived someone else entirely. "You want to know about my father?" Riley asked, her voice carrying a new quality that made all 3 girls pause uncertainly. "Staff Sergeant Marcus Martinez, United States Army. Before he deployed, he was a combat instructor at Fort Bragg. He specialized in close-quarters combat, hand-to-hand techniques, and urban warfare tactics." Riley reached up and slowly unzipped her father's jacket, letting it fall to the gymnasium floor. Underneath, she wore a simple black t-shirt that revealed arms marked with lean muscle and old scars from years of intensive training. Her stance shifted into something that looked casual, but radiated controlled lethality. He started training. Me when I was 8 years old, Riley continued, her voice now carrying the calm confidence of someone who had been preparing for this moment her entire life. Every morning before school, every evening after homework, karate, jiu-jitsu, Krav Maga, boxing. He said that if something happened to him, I needed to be able to protect myself and my family. The three bullies exchanged uncertain glances, suddenly aware that something fundamental had changed in the dynamic. "You're bluffing," Madison said, but her voice had lost its earlier confidence. She took a half-step backward, suddenly uncertain about the girl standing before them with such composed stillness. "You've never fought back once. You're all talk." Riley's response was movement so fluid it seemed choreographed. She shifted her weight to her back foot, hands rising into a defensive position that spoke of thousands of hours of practice. Her breathing remained controlled, her eyes tracking all three opponents simultaneously with the tactical awareness of a trained fighter. "I never fought back because I made a promise," Riley said, her voice carrying across the gymnasium with deadly calm. "I promised my father I would only use what he taught me if my life was in danger. Bullying isn't life-threatening. Humiliation isn't life-threatening. Even your pathetic attempts at psychological warfare weren't life-threatening." Amber, emboldened by her size advantage and athletic background, decided to test Riley's resolve. She lunged forward with the aggressive confidence of someone who had never faced real resistance. Riley sidestepped the charge with minimal effort, her movement precise and economical. As Amber stumbled past, Riley's elbow connected with her ribs, not hard enough to cause serious injury, but with enough force to send the soccer star crashing into the bleachers. "But trapping me in here, 3 against 1, with the doors locked," Riley continued, never taking her eyes off Madison and Jessica. "That changes things." Jessica fumbled with her phone, trying to call for help while still recording, but Riley was already moving. She closed the distance between them in 2 quick steps, her hand shooting out to grab Jessica's wrist. With a simple twist that her father had taught her before she turned 10, Riley applied pressure to the nerve cluster, causing Jessica's fingers to spasm and drop the phone. The device clattered across the floor, its screen cracking against the gymnasium wall. 12 years of training, Riley said, maintaining her grip on Jessica's wrist just long enough to establish dominance before releasing her. "My father didn't just teach me how to fight. He taught me how to end fights quickly and efficiently. He taught me how to disable opponents without causing permanent damage. He taught me the difference between defense and vengeance." Madison backed away toward the locked doors, her manicured nails scrabbling against the metal handles. "You're crazy! You can't do this! My father will sue your family into the ground." Riley's laugh was soft, but carried an edge that made all 3 girls freeze. "Your father's lawyers versus a military widow with PTSD and a teenage daughter with documented evidence of months of harassment. Jessica was kind enough to create a digital trail of your behavior. Every cruel post, every recorded incident, every witness who saw you target me." Amber struggled to her feet, clutching her ribs and breathing heavily. "This isn't over," she wheezed, but the fight had gone out of her voice. "Yes, it is," Riley said with absolute certainty. She moved to the center of the gymnasium, positioning herself where she could see all 3 opponents clearly. "You wanted to see what I was capable of. You wanted to push me until I broke. Congratulations, you succeeded." Riley's stance shifted again, settling into something that looked deceptively relaxed, but radiated controlled violence. "But here's what you didn't understand. I didn't break. I just stopped pretending to be broken." The gymnasium fell silent, except for the sound of Amber's labored breathing and the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. Riley stood in the center of the polished floor, no longer the hunched, frightened girl who had endured months of torment. In her place was someone who moved with the quiet confidence of a predator who had finally decided to reveal her true nature. Madison pressed herself against the locked doors, her designer clothes wrinkled and her perfectly styled hair disheveled. "You can't keep us here," she said, but her voice cracked with fear. "This is kidnapping. This is assault." "No," Riley replied calmly. "This is education. For 5 months, you three have been teaching me about cruelty, about power, about what happens when people think they can hurt others without consequences. Now it's my turn to teach." She moved toward the equipment storage room, her footsteps eerily quiet on the gymnasium floor. From inside the metal cabinet, she retrieved a wooden practice sword from the martial arts supplies, testing its weight with the familiarity of someone who had trained with similar weapons countless times. "My father's final letter to me," Riley said, holding the wooden blade with respectful precision, "arrived 2 weeks after his funeral. He wrote it during his last deployment, when he knew he might not come home. He told me that strength without restraint is just brutality, but restraint without strength is just cowardice." Jessica cowered near the bleachers, her expensive phone destroyed and her carefully constructed social media empire crumbling around her. "Please, we're sorry. We'll leave you alone. We'll delete everything." Riley performed a series of kata movements, the wooden sword cutting through the air with lethal precision. Each strike was controlled, each movement flowed into the next with the grace of someone who had mastered their craft through years of dedicated practice. The display was mesmerizing and terrifying, a demonstration of skill that left no doubt about her capabilities. "Delete everything?" Riley asked, her voice carrying a note of genuine curiosity. "Jessica, you documented every moment of my humiliation. You turned my pain into entertainment for hundreds of students. You violated my privacy, my family's privacy, and you did it all for likes and shares." The wooden sword came to rest at Jessica's throat, not touching but close enough that the girl could feel the air displacement from its movement. "Tell me, Jessica, how do you delete trauma? How do you undo months of psychological warfare? How do you restore a reputation that you systematically destroyed?" Amber tried to stand, but Riley's free hand gestured for her to remain seated. "Stay down, Amber. Your ribs aren't broken, but they will be if you test me again. I know exactly how much pressure to apply to cause specific types of damage. That's the difference between trained fighters and bullies who rely on intimidation." Madison found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "What do you want from us?" Riley lowered the practice sword and turned to face all. "3 girls. I want you to understand that your actions have consequences. I want you to realize that the quiet girl you've been tormenting could have ended this at any time. I chose restraint, I chose mercy, but that was my choice to make, not yours to exploit." The truth settled over them like a heavy blanket. For months, they had been toying with someone who possessed the skills to seriously harm them. Riley's restraint hadn't been weakness. It had been the only thing protecting them from the full extent of her capabilities. The wooden practice sword returned to the equipment cabinet with a soft click that seemed to echo through the gymnasium like a gavel falling. Riley walked back to where her father's jacket lay on the floor, picking it up and slipping it over her shoulders with the reverence of someone donning sacred armor. The transformation was complete. She was no longer the victim they had created, but she wasn't the monster they had tried to make her become either. "Here's what's going to happen," Riley said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had seized complete control of the situation. "Madison, your father's real estate. Empire built its reputation on community trust and family values. How do you think his clients will react when they discover his daughter has been running a systematic harassment campaign against a military widow's family?" Madison's face went pale as the implications sank in. Her father's business depended on maintaining relationships with local families, many of whom had military connections. The scandal would be devastating to both his professional reputation and their family's standing in the community. "Jessica, Your mother works for the district attorney's office as a victim's advocate. She's built her career helping families navigate trauma and legal challenges. Imagine her reaction when she learns that her daughter has been psychologically torturing a girl whose father died serving our country and whose mother is struggling with combat-related PTSD. Jessica's breathing became rapid and shallow as she realized the full scope of what Riley was threatening. Her mother's position required absolute ethical standards, and any hint of her daughter's behavior could jeopardize everything her family had worked to achieve. And Amber, Riley continued, turning to the injured soccer player, still clutching her ribs, your scholarship to State University includes a character clause. Athletic departments take their reputation seriously, especially when it comes to bullying and harassment. One phone call to Coach Williams about your extracurricular activities, and your college dreams disappear. The three girls exchanged desperate glances, suddenly understanding that Riley held their futures in her hands. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that they seemed to shrink before her eyes, reduced to the helpless victims they had always tried to make her. Riley pulled out her own phone, swiping through screens with deliberate precision. The beautiful thing about social media is that everything leaves a digital footprint. Jessica, you thought you were clever using anonymous accounts, but IP addresses don't lie. I've spent the last month documenting every post, every message, every cruel comment you've made. I've identified the fake accounts, traced the harassment campaigns, and compiled evidence that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. She showed them the screen, revealing a comprehensive file of screenshots, timestamps, and technical data that laid bare their months of coordinated attacks. I also have security footage from the school's exterior cameras showing you three cornering me multiple times. The interior cameras might not work, but the parking lot footage clearly shows the pattern of harassment. Madison found her voice, though it trembled with desperation. What do you want? Money? We can pay you to keep quiet. Riley's expression hardened. You think this is about money? You attacked my family's honor, our sacrifice, our pain. You turned my father's death into a weapon against me. There isn't enough money in your trust fund to undo that damage. The gymnasium doors rattled as someone tried the handles from outside. Riley smiled, checking her watch with satisfaction. That would be my grandmother. I texted her 20 minutes ago when you first cornered me. Riley Martinez, retired Army nurse, widow of a Vietnam veteran, mother of a Gold Star family. She's been waiting 30 years for someone to threaten her granddaughter. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway, accompanied by voices. Multiple adults, including what sounded like school administration and possibly law enforcement. Riley had orchestrated this entire confrontation, using her tormentor's predictable behavior against them. You see, the difference between soldiers and bullies, Riley said, as the footsteps grew closer, is that soldiers understand strategy. They plan for multiple outcomes. They gather intelligence. They wait for the right moment to strike. The doors burst open, revealing Riley's grandmother, flanked by Principal Morrison, Officer Stevens from the school resource program, and Mr. Chen, Jessica's father, whose face was dark with fury. The cavalry had arrived, but not for the people who had expected rescue. Riley's grandmother took in the scene with the tactical assessment of someone who had served in combat zones. Her weathered hands, marked by decades of military service and medical training, clenched into fists as she saw her granddaughter standing over three cowering students. The next hour unfolded with military precision. Evidence was presented. Statements were taken, and consequences were delivered with the swift efficiency that comes from having documentation for every claim. Madison faced suspension and community service, her father's business reputation taking a significant hit when the story broke in local media. Jessica's college applications were flagged for character violations, and her mother's position required her to recuse herself from several high-profile cases due to the conflict of interest. Amber's scholarship was suspended pending a full investigation. By the university's ethics committee, Riley walked out of Westfield Academy that afternoon with her head held high for the first time in months. Her grandmother's arm around her shoulders felt like the embrace of an entire military family, proud, protective, and unbreakable. The quiet girl who had endured months of torment was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true strength came not from avoiding conflict, but from choosing when and how to engage it. In the days that followed, the story spread through social media with the same viral intensity that had once amplified Riley's humiliation. But this time, she controlled the narrative. Students who had ignored her suffering suddenly wanted to be her friend. Teachers who had failed to notice her struggles now praised her courage. The transformation was complete, but Riley knew the real victory wasn't in the attention or admiration of others. The real victory was in honoring her father's memory by becoming the warrior he had trained her to be while maintaining the moral compass he had instilled in her. She had faced her demons and emerged stronger, not because she had defeated her enemies through violence, but because she had defeated them through strategy, patience, and the kind of quiet strength that builds over time like a storm gathering. Voss, if you enjoyed this story of hidden strength and strategic justice, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories that will shock and inspire you. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads, and let us know in the comments below what other amazing stories you'd like us to cover. Your support helps us bring these powerful narratives to light, so don't forget to like this video and share it with friends who need to hear about the power of patience, preparation, and standing up for what's right when the moment finally comes.